A tale of two summits, Hiroshima and Xi'an, each symbolic in their own way. The former of the catastrophic cost of war, the latter once the departure point for the world's first trade route. The former 49 years old, the latter barely won. Regardless, each vying for power in an already complicated set of dynamics.
We are here and we will be here till the very end. Be sure about that.
Thank you very much.
Though Ukraine dominated the G7's attention through surprise visits and promises of fighter jets, the group also offered a stark warning to China.
China has a special responsibility in the world. It has to play by international rules, and we call on China to press Russia to stop its military aggression.
Leaders used the term economic coercion, accusing China of using trade to bully other countries, and that wasn't taken lightly.
China has never engaged in coercion or bullying. We urge the G7 to conform to the general trend of the era, which is openness and inclusiveness, and refrain from engaging in coercive diplomacy and closed and exclusive cliques.
But the G7 also said it wanted constructive and stable relations, adding that its policies aren't designed to harm China or thwart its economic progress and development.
We do seek to cooperate with China on matters of mutual interest, and also that we will work to address our significant concerns that we have with China in a range of areas.
The seemingly authentic moments picked up on camera today stood out in an otherwise very staged world of diplomacy. Zelenskyy received a lot of their attention, but today's words to China might indicate where the G7's real fears lie.
Well, joining me now is Jennifer Cassidy, a former diplomat representing Ireland at the UN and the EU. She now teaches diplomacy at Oxford University. Jennifer, good to have you back on the programme. Let's just start briefly with this battle for Bakhmut, the meat grinder that's been going on for months. If the Russians have indeed taken it, is that decisive? Does it make a difference to the course of this war?
Certainly, because regarding any land being taken and land being taken so decisively, and we've seen Zelensky's position over and over and heard it over and over saying there will be no peace, there will be no concession, there will be no land given. And so the war, it does signal to the international community alike and to Russia that this war will continue until that land is given back. And we have heard other countries say concessions should be made regarding land and peace could ensue, but that is certainly not the narrative that Ukraine is hosting. Sure. And telling the world.
So, I mean, in a sense, condemning Russia has been easy for the G7 because they've done so since the beginning of the war. But the position on China is much trickier, isn't it?
Yes, but I do think to lead back to the previous point, their position on China, this is nothing new. We see this in the G7 numerous times a year, over decades. There's always been a consistent narrative of critiquing China regarding their economic clout and military might. But it is now a vehicle. China is a vehicle in order to perhaps persuade Russia to end the war. It's the one kind of middle power that we see doing an absentee votes in the UN and absentee votes in the UN Security Council. So I think it's somewhat of a diplomatic signal to use China as a kind of a facade in order to get to Russia as well, not to just be fully focused and critiquing on Russia.
And the Chinese have engaged in their own diplomatic dance, aren't they? Because they're trying to woo Europe and separate Europe from America while saying, look at the Americans, all they're trying to do is contain the rise of China.
Exactly. And people have been discussing this for the last 20 years, the new Cold War between China and the US. But as I always say to my students, I hate the term the Cold War, because when we look at the previous Cold War, who was the Cold War cold for? It wasn't cold for Vietnam. It wasn't cold for Korea. These type of terms don't work. But China is very much looking at the countries, particularly East Africa. We see India, we see Sri Lanka, regarding this term that we're seeing now coming out of the G7 summit, economic coercion that they're using, which I'm a bit dubious about, but they're using it. We see a lot of these countries now facing east. And if you look at the map of the global map of the countries that are now dominating the imports that have China over the US, China is winning the game in that.